Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with President Trump today at the White House. Their talks comes amid Israel's ongoing war against Hamas, efforts to block Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, and new reciprocal tariffs from the U.S. Our Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
Stopping Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and negotiating trade amid new tariffs. These were among the discussions at the White House today in meetings with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump. Netanyahu is the first foreign leader to meet with Trump since Trump began hiking tariffs on countries around the world, including a 17% tariff on Israel. According to a top White House economic advisor, since these tariffs went into effect, over 50 countries reached out to Washington to negotiate. Netanyahu saying Israel will lead by example.
We will eliminate the trade deficit with the United States. We intend to do it very quickly. We think it's the right thing to do. And we're going to also eliminate trade barriers, a variety of trade barriers that have been put up unnecessarily. And I think Israel can serve as a model.
Trump says these tariffs could be permanent, but there may be room for negotiation.
We're going to get fair deals and good deals with every country, and if we don't, we're going to have nothing to do with them. They're not going to be allowed to participate in the United States.
As for Israel, it's unclear if after this meeting tariffs will change.
But we give Israel billions of dollars a year, billions. It's one of the highest of, and we give a lot of countries money.
The two leaders also discussed preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Trump said that he's speaking directly to the leaders of the Iranian regime in their meeting on Saturday.
Doing a deal would be preferable to doing the obvious. And hopefully those talks will be successful, and I think it would be in Iran's best interest if they are successful.
Trump and Netanyahu also talked strategy on freeing the remaining hostages while eliminating Hamas terrorists in Gaza.
We're looking at another ceasefire. We'll see what happens, but we want to get the hostages out. The Israeli people want the hostages out more than anything. They want the hostages out. This man is working very hard with us to do that.
Going forward, this meeting between Trump and Netanyahu could set the stage for how world leaders negotiate with Trump over tariffs. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
The Supreme Court today delivering a temporary win for the Trump administration. The court paused a midnight deadline for return a man who was deported to El Salvador.
Chief Justice John Roberts on Monday granted an emergency appeal from the Trump administration, which means deported Salvadoran Kilmar Abrego Garcia will remain in El Salvador's maximum security prison. The U.S. has admitted that they sent Abrego Garcia in error, but argue that he's no longer under U.S. jurisdiction. He was deported along with more than 200 Venezuelans, all believed to be associated with gangs such as Tren de Aragua and MS-13. The Department of Homeland Security says it verified that Abrego Garcia is a lead member of MS-13, an international criminal gang the U.S. has designated as a terrorist organization. President Trump authorized the deportation of the suspected gang members under the Alien Enemies Act, which allows removal without due process during a national threat. The threat typically involves a war, but can also involve an invasion or incursion. Lower courts have blocked Trump from using the act for deportations. In Abrego Garcia's case, the administration argues that the lower court's order to return him is unlawful because it requires him to be removed from foreign custody.
And breaking news just now, the Supreme Court has now lifted an order blocking the Trump administration from using the Alien Enemies Act to deport Venezuelans. Meanwhile, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi on Sunday defended the administration's deportation. Let's take a look.
ICE has testified, members of ICE, that he is an MS-13 gang member. And the defense, his lawyers, have argued, well, he should be here because he was studying to be an electrician. So the argument that because these people are living among us, these illegal aliens from El Salvador, means they're not part of a gang, that's how they're hiding. That's how they're succeeding.
Meanwhile, the Supreme Court could take up another case from the Trump administration. An appeals court today ruled that 2 federal board members who were fired by the Trump administration can now go back to their jobs. One is from the Merit Systems Protection Board and the other from the National Labor Relations Board. But the basis for their ruling is a 90-year-old Supreme Court decision that legal experts say could appeal to the conservative majority on the Supreme Court. And President Trump today vowing to impose more tariffs on China as soon as Wednesday. This comes after the Chinese Communist Party issued a 34% retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. last week. What's driving the back and forth? NTD's Sam Wong has the details.
With China, as you know, against my statement, they put a 34% tariff on above what their ridiculous tariffs were already. Hundreds of billions of dollars a year they'd make on us on trade, and it shouldn't be that way.
President Trump on Monday vowing to impose an additional 50% tariffs on Chinese imports. That's if Beijing does not withdraw its retaliatory duties on American goods by Tuesday. Additionally, Trump wrote on Truth Social, quote, "All talks with China concerning their requested meetings with us will be terminated." With that, he added that negotiations between the U.S. and other countries will begin immediately.
When you look at the trade deficit that we have with certain countries, way over $1 billion per country. But with China, it's $1 trillion. And unless we solve that problem, I'm not going to make a deal.
According to the White House, the upcharge would come on top of the more than 50% tariffs already put in place. That means the total U.S. duties on Chinese imports could soar past 100% in the coming days. President Trump unveiled his wide-ranging tariffs last week on what he called Liberation Day.
This will be indeed the golden age of America. It's coming back. We're going to come back very strongly.
Officials said the duties are partially aimed at reducing U.S. trade deficit, bringing back manufacturing, and tackling unfair trade practices by the Chinese Communist Party. These are long-time issues going back even before Congress issued permanent normal trade relations status for China. Critics say the move allowed American companies to export manufacturing abroad and deplete U.S. production, a concern echoed by both Republicans and Democrats for decades.
China trade supports 170,000 jobs in the United States, 170,000 jobs, whereas our imports from China support 10 million jobs at least. Fact is that U.S.-China trade is a job loser.
Worth noting, foreign-made pharmaceuticals are exempt from reciprocal tariffs, but President Trump says he plans to impose levies on medications with the goal of bringing production back to the United States. China currently dominates the sector. Aside from taxing China directly, the White House also imposed a secondary 25% tariff on countries that buy crude oil from Venezuela. China is currently the world's largest buyer of Venezuelan oil. Meanwhile, Trump also imposed duties on Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, and Mexico, all of which are countries used by China to circumvent U.S. tariffs. Sam Wong, NTD News, Washington, D.C.
In contrast to mainland China, Taiwan will not be adding tariffs on the U.S. Taiwan's president vows to increase imports from the U.S. and start talking about zero tariffs. He added, quote, "We will usher in a new golden age of shared prosperity." And U.S. markets closed lower on Monday for the third day after President Trump announced widespread reciprocal tariffs last week. Asian markets also plunged overnight. The administration says Trump's tariffs have brought around 70 countries to signal their willingness to now negotiate with the president. Trump's economic advisors are now defending his tariffs. Watch.
Ease off the rhetoric a little bit. The fact is that say 10% baseline tariff is on 14% of GDP. That's about how much trade we have, how many imports. And so 86% of GDP is affected by the deregulation and the tax cuts and everything else. And even if you think, and I think a lot of us at the White House think that these economic responses are exaggerated by critics, even if you think that there will be some negative effect from the trade side, that's still a small share of GDP. And so the idea that it's going to be a nuclear winter or something like that is completely irresponsible rhetoric.
And now to discuss the latest impact of President Trump's new tariffs, we're happy to have on Jonathon Marek, Senior Project Manager of Technology and Geoeconomic Affairs at the National Bureau of Asia Research. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good evening.
Good evening. And so first, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was asked how long this adjustment period would be. Let me play you a clip of his response. Watch.
This is a national security problem, which we saw during COVID. We saw during COVID that optimal supply chains are not resilient. And what I could say is the only good outcome from COVID is it was a beta test for what would happen if our supply chains got broken.
So first, Jonathan, speaking of supply chains here, how important is it to protect the U.S. against another supply chain disruption like COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly critical. It is, in many respects, a national security matter, as the secretary noted. But I think the key challenge is kind of differentiating the China challenge, where we certainly have major risks and major exposures from some of the concerns we have with other partners that have been really helping us, like Taiwan, like Japan, by announcing kind of large scale investments. And so I hope that those questions can get resolved quickly, negotiated quickly, and that the focus can stay on the supply chain risks that emanate out of our linkages with China.
And now the market is reacting aggressively to President Trump's new tariffs. How should we understand the uncertainty when it comes to market reactions?
Yeah, I think the core question and the core uncertainty is whether this is kind of a McKinleyite move to kind of reshore large-scale production to the U.S., and therefore that these tariffs are going to remain in place for the 4 years of Trump's term, and that Trump would hope that they would even persist after the end of his term. Or is this kind of an art of the deal style move to get leverage to be used in negotiation? And I think that as of now, the lack of clarity about which of those is being pursued by the administration is really what's driving a lot of the market reaction. I think certainly if you were to see a persistent tariff approach, then it would have a market impact, but potentially less of one than you're getting now, where there's businesses don't know whether this is going to be a short-term negotiating tool or a long-term measure.
Right, short-term uncertainty, definitely a big thing that's driving the markets right now. And diving deeper now to the topic of trade, can you explain to our viewers here why the World Trade Organization was first established and the origin of globalism that we've been talking about here? And also, how has the concept of globalism really changed the U.S. economy and trade over the years?
Yeah, so I think the key factor to understand in the emergence of the WTO out of its predecessor, the GATT system, is that it was designed to kind of create long-term certainty and stability among market economies. And then obviously that was really disrupted by the admission of China as a member, just kind of under the hope that their economy would liberalize and that they would abide by WTO rules. And so that was really a kind of disruptive change, but kind of the broader set of changes to the U.S. economy that have resulted from the global trade order over the past decades have been really mixed. Obviously, it's allowed the U.S. to be globally competitive in really high value sectors like tech, like services, but it's also had adverse effects on the manufacturing base. And I think there are a lot of questions about how to restore that in key sectors, whether that's semiconductors, whether that's shipbuilding, and then also, again, specifically the challenge of dealing with China as a major non-market economy.
And speaking of China's economy here, as we expect President Trump's new tariffs to really, impact China's own domestic economy and its exports, will you think China have to now turn to the Chinese consumers to increase their potential profit, or are they going to be forced to give in to negotiating with President Trump now?
I think they certainly will open negotiations. I think their recent moves, both to set up retaliatory tariffs of their own, as well as some export bans on rare earths, although they're really just licensing requirements at this point, suggest that these are kind of steps toward giving themselves a stronger hand. I think they will definitely try to increase domestic demand, but obviously they've been struggling with that since the end of the COVID lockdowns and really, quite frankly, have been trying to figure out how to do that for decades. So I think the third thing that is important to look at is how they're going to try to continue to offload excess capacity, continue to increase their exports to third countries, whether that's Europe, whether that's elsewhere in Asia. I think that that's something that they've been really trying hard to do. And have gotten some pushback. And so, again, I think it's really important that the U.S. try to get other countries on board with the agenda vis-a-vis China. And that requires kind of wrapping up negotiations with those partners as soon as possible, and really then just like focusing on China.
We're definitely watching closely how many countries are now starting to negotiate with the U.S. administration. Jonathon Marek, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.